The guard stood perfectly still outside the royal residence, his red uniform crisp against the gray London morning. But inside his chest, his heart was breaking, a promise he'd kept for over 20 years. He had served the crown without question, through scandals and celebrations, through whispers and wars. But now, for the first time in his decorated career, he was about to do the unthinkable. He was going to say no, not to an enemy, not to a threat, but to the woman who would one day be queen consort. And it all began with 3 words spoken in a hallway that were never meant to reach his ears. Sergeant James. Whitmore had been part of the Queen's Guard for 23 years. He wasn't just any guard. He was one of Her Majesty's personal protection officers, trusted with secrets most people would never know existed. He had walked beside Queen Elizabeth II through private gardens and public ceremonies. He had stood watch while she worked late into the night, reviewing documents that shaped nations. She knew his name. She remembered his daughter's graduation. She once asked about his wife's recovery from surgery. That kind of relationship was rare. Guards were meant to be invisible, silent, almost part of the architecture. But the Queen saw people. She remembered them. And over 2 decades, James had become more than a protector. He had become a quiet, steady presence she relied on. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear more untold royal secrets, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what happens next. The trouble started on a cold February afternoon in 2023. James was assigned to Clarence's house for the week, covering additional security during a private family gathering. Prince William and Catherine were visiting. So was Camilla, the queen consort, title she had held since Queen Elizabeth's passing the previous September. James had served Camilla before. She was polite, professional, never demanding. But there was always a coolness in the air when she and Catherine were in the same room. Everyone who worked in royal households knew it. The 2 women were civil, respectful in public, but there was no warmth. No easy laughter. Just carefully measured words and distant smiles. That afternoon, James stood in the main hallway near the drawing room. He could hear voices inside, muffled by the thick oak door. Catherine's voice, light and gracious. Camilla's lower and more deliberate. Then the door opened. Catherine stepped out first, her face composed, but her eyes carrying something James recognized immediately. Hurt. She walked past him without a word, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. A moment later, Camilla emerged. She didn't notice James at first. She was speaking to her private secretary, a sharp-featured woman named Fiona, who had followed her out. "Well, she certainly has opinions, doesn't she?" Camilla said, her voice carrying a faint edge. "One would think after all these years she'd understand her place a bit better." Fiona murmured something James couldn't hear. Camilla continued, adjusting her bracelet as she spoke. "Catherine may be adored by the public, but popularity isn't the same as wisdom. The Queen understood that. She knew when to speak and when to simply follow." James felt his jaw tighten. He remained perfectly still, eyes forward, breathing steady. But inside, something shifted. Camilla finally noticed him, and her expression smoothed into practiced neutrality. "Sergeant Whitmore," she said with a polite nod, then continued down the hallway. James didn't move. He stood there for a long moment, processing what he'd just heard. It wasn't the words themselves, though they stung. It was the tone, the dismissal, the subtle cruelty aimed at a woman James had also come to deeply respect. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had always treated staff with genuine kindness. She learned names. She asked about families. She thanked people, not out of obligation, but because she meant it. James had watched her comfort a young maid who'd made a mistake with the tea service, telling her it happened to everyone and not to worry. And now, behind closed doors, Camilla was diminishing her, suggesting she didn't understand her place, comparing her unfavorably to the late Queen. James returned to his quarters. That evening, unable to shake the conversation from his mind, he sat at his small desk, staring at a photograph on the wall. It was from 2015, a rare candid shot taken during a private garden party. Queen Elizabeth stood in the center, smiling. Beside her, James stood at attention, but if you looked closely, you could see the faintest hint of pride in his eyes. The Queen had given him that photograph herself, signed on the back, to James, with gratitude for your unwavering service. He traced the edge of the frame with his finger. Unwavering service? That's what he'd always given. But service to whom, exactly? To the crown? To the institution? Or to the people who wore it? The next morning, James received his new assignment. He was being transferred to Queen Camilla's personal detail for the upcoming royal tour. It was considered an honor, a sign of trust and seniority. But as James read the assignment letter, something inside him went cold. He couldn't do it. James sat in the briefing room the following afternoon, surrounded by 5 other officers who would form Camilla's protection team for the tour. The head of royal security, Commander Peters, stood at the front. Clicking through slides, showing routes, venues, and potential security concerns, James barely heard a word. His mind kept returning to that hallway, to Camilla's voice, to Catherine's wounded eyes. Sergeant Whitmore. James blinked. Commander Peters was looking at him expectantly. Yes, sir? I asked if you had any questions about the close protection protocols for the Paris segment. No, sir. All clear. Peters studied him for a moment, then continued. But after the briefing ended, he asked James to stay behind. Is everything all right? Peters asked once they were alone. He was a stern man, military through and through, but he'd known James for 15 years. He could read people. James hesitated. How could he explain this? That he couldn't serve Camilla because of a conversation she didn't even know he'd heard? That his loyalty to a deceased queen and his respect for a princess were making him question an assignment? I'm not sure I'm the right fit for this detail, sir, James finally said. Peters frowned. You're one of our most experienced officers. Her Majesty specifically requested seasoned personnel. You've worked with the Queen Consort before without issue. I understand, sir. But I'm formally requesting to be reassigned. The room went quiet. Requesting reassignment from a royal detail wasn't just unusual. It was practically unheard of. It raised questions. It implied problems. This is highly irregular, Sergeant. I need a reason. James met his commander's eyes. Personal reasons, sir? Nothing that affects my ability to serve. But I don't believe I can provide the level of dedication this particular assignment requires. Peters sat back in his chair, studying James carefully. This is about Queen Elizabeth, isn't it? James didn't answer immediately. Peters continued. You were one of her favorites. Everyone knew it. And I know the transition hasn't been easy for some of the old guard. He used the phrase deliberately. But the crown continues, Whitmore. Our duty continues. Personal feelings can't enter into it. With respect, sir, personal feelings are exactly what make us good at this job, James said quietly. We don't protect buildings or titles. We protect people. And to do that well, we need to care about them. To be willing to take a bullet for them without hesitation. I'm not sure I can honestly say I'm there with this assignment. It was the most honest thing James had said in years, and it hung in the air between them like a confession. Peters was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed. You're putting me in a very difficult position. I know, sir. And I apologize. But I'm asking, if I grant this, it will be noted in your file. It could affect future assignments. Your career prospects? I understand. Peters stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the grounds. The Queen Consort hasn't done anything to warrant this, has she? Because if there's a security concern, or inappropriate behavior, no, sir. Nothing like that. This is entirely about my own limitations. Another long silence. Finally, Peters turned back. I'll see what I can do. But James, this is your one pass. If you refuse another royal assignment, you'll be transferred out of personal protection entirely. Possibly out of the guard altogether. Asterisk, I understand, sir. Thank you. James left the office feeling both relieved and unsettled. He'd crossed a line. He'd let personal feelings dictate a professional decision. It went against everything he'd been trained to do, but as he walked through the palace corridors, he passed a portrait of Queen Elizabeth. She was wearing her crown, her expression dignified and knowing. James paused, looking up at her. What would she have wanted him to do? The Queen had been a woman of duty above all else. She had sacrificed personal happiness for the crown more times than anyone could count. She had put institution before individual, always. But she had also been fiercely protective of the people she loved. James had seen it. The way she looked at William and Catherine, the warmth in her eyes when her great-grandchildren visited, the quiet pride when Catherine handled difficult public moments with grace. Would the Queen have wanted James to protect someone who belittled Catherine behind closed doors? Or would she have understood his refusal? He would never know. That evening, James received a call from Peters. The reassignment had been approved. He would remain on Palace's detail, but would not join the tour. Another officer would take his place. James thanked him and hung up. He should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt empty. His wife Helen noticed immediately when he came home that night. "What happened?" she asked, setting down her book. James told her everything. The hallway conversation, the assignment, his refusal. Helen listened quietly, then said, "You did the right thing." "Did I? I just potentially ended my career over words I shouldn't have even heard." "You ended it because you have integrity," Helen corrected. "Because you couldn't pretend to protect someone you don't respect. That's not weakness, James. That's honesty." But as James lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he wondered if honesty was enough. He had broken an unspoken rule of royal service: you don't choose. You serve whoever wears the crown, whoever holds the title without judgment or preference. Except he had chosen, and now he would have to live with the consequences. What James didn't know was that his choice had not gone unnoticed, and the consequences would be far different than he imagined. 3 weeks passed. James continued his regular duties, working palace security rotations and event details. He waited for the fallout, for whispers in the ranks, for the transfer orders that would send him to some distant, unremarkable post, but nothing came. The royal tour happened without him. He saw the photos in the news, Camilla smiling beside King Charles, the protection team barely visible in the background. The officer who had replaced him, a younger man named Davies, performed flawlessly. Life continued. But James felt the change. He was being quietly sidelined. Not assigned to the most prestigious events. Not included in certain briefings. It was subtle, but he noticed then. On a rainy Tuesday in March, James received an unexpected summons. He was to report to Kensington Palace, to the office of the Prince and Princess of Wales. James's heart quickened as he drove through the London streets. Kensington Palace was William and Catherine's residence. He'd worked security there before, never been summoned directly to their private offices. Had Catherine somehow learned what happened? Had Camilla mentioned his refusal? Was this about to get much worse? He was escorted through familiar corridors by a young aide who made polite small talk about the weather. Finally, they stopped outside a modest office door. "The princess will see you now," the aide said. Knocking gently before opening it, Catherine stood near the window, wearing a simple navy dress. She turned as James entered, and her face broke into a warm smile. "Sergeant Whitmore, thank you so much for coming." James stood at attention. "Your Royal Highness. Please sit." She gestured to a chair. "Would you like tea?" "No, thank you, ma'am." Catherine sat across from him, her posture relaxed, but her eyes sharp. "I imagine you're wondering why I asked to see you." "Yes, ma'am." She was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I'm aware that you recently requested reassignment from a particular royal detail. I'm also aware that it was approved, which is quite unusual." James felt his stomach tighten. "Ma'am, if this is about—" Catherine held up a gentle hand. "I'm not here to question your decision, Sergeant. I'm here to thank you." James blinked. "I'm sorry." "I know why you requested that reassignment," Catherine said softly. "I know what you overheard at Clarence House." The room seemed to tilt. James opened his mouth, then closed it. How could she possibly know? Catherine saw his confusion. "The hallway outside the drawing room has security cameras, Sergeant. No audio, but the footage showed you standing there when Camilla and her secretary left the room. Your expression. It wasn't difficult to deduce what might have been said." James felt heat rise to his face. Ma'am, I apologize if I overstepped. You didn't, Catherine interrupted firmly. You heard something you shouldn't have, and you made a choice based on your conscience. That's not overstepping. That's integrity. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the palace gardens. People think this life is glamorous, and in many ways, it is. But it's also incredibly isolating. You're constantly surrounded by people, yet you never quite know who sees you as a person and who sees you as a title. She turned back to James. Do you know what the Queen once told me? She said the hardest part of royal life isn't the public pressure or the scrutiny. It's the loneliness. The knowledge that very few people will ever be truly honest with you. Catherine returned to her seat. When I heard what you'd done, when I learned you'd refused an assignment rather than serve someone who had spoken about me that way. Sergeant, you gave me something rare. You showed me that someone in this world still values loyalty over career advancement. That someone still thinks character matters. James didn't know what to say. He'd expected reprimand, perhaps even dismissal. Not this. I also know, Catherine continued, that your decision likely hurt your standing. That you may face consequences for putting principle above protocol. I made my choice, ma'am. I'll accept whatever comes. Catherine smiled, but there was sadness in it. The Queen would have liked that answer. She always said you were one of the good ones. James felt his throat tighten at the mention of Queen Elizabeth. She was. Extraordinary, ma'am. She was, Catherine agreed. And she cared about you, Sergeant. She mentioned you several times over the years. Said you had an old-fashioned sense of duty that was becoming rare. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Catherine leaned forward slightly. I asked you here because I wanted you to know your sacrifice didn't go unnoticed. And because I wanted to ask you something. Anything, ma'am. William and I are expanding our protection team. We need someone senior, experienced, and more importantly, someone we can trust absolutely. Someone who won't just protect our safety, but who understands what we're trying to build here. A more transparent, more compassionate monarchy. James's heart began to race. I'd like you to consider joining our detail, Catherine said. It would be a lateral move, not a promotion, but you'd be working directly with our family, with our children, with people who, I hope, share your values. James was speechless. This wasn't just a new assignment. This was Catherine offering him sanctuary, a way out of the consequences of his choice. Ma'am, I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, Catherine replied. I know this is sudden, and I know it might seem like I'm asking you to choose sides in some kind of family conflict, but that's not what this is. This is me offering a position to someone I know I can trust. Someone the Queen trusted. Us. She stood, and James quickly rose as well. Catherine extended her hand, and James shook it gently. Take a few days, she said. Discuss it with your family, and let me know. As James left Kensington Palace, his mind was reeling. He'd gone from facing the end of his career to being offered a coveted position with the future. King and Queen. But there was something else. Something Catherine had said that echoed in his mind. Someone who understands what we're trying to build here. The Wales family wasn't just offering him a job. They were offering him a chance to be part of something larger. A vision for the monarchy's future. And deep down, James knew what his answer would be. James accepted the position 3 days later. The transfer was handled quietly, processed through official channels with minimal fanfare. On paper, it looked like a standard reassignment. But everyone in royal protection circles knew better. Sergeant James Whitmore, one of Queen Elizabeth's most trusted guards, had chosen to serve the Wales family, and he had done so immediately after refusing. To serve the Queen Consort, the implications were impossible to ignore, James reported to Kensington Palace on a Monday morning in April. The head of William and Catherine's protection team, a known-sense woman named Sarah Mitchell, met him in the security office. Welcome to the team. Whitmore, she said, shaking his hand firmly. I won't pretend I don't know why you're here, but I also won't ask about it. What matters is you're here now, and you're expected to perform at the highest level. Understood, ma'am. Good. Let me be clear about something. The prince and princess run a tight ship, but they run it differently than other royals. They want security that's effective but not invasive. They want their children to have as normal a childhood as possible. And they want staff who understand that protecting them means protecting their vision, not just their bodies. James nodded. It was exactly what Catherine had hinted at during their meeting. Over the next few weeks, James settled into his new role. He worked rotations at Kensington Palace, accompanied the family to public events, and provided security during private outings. And he quickly understood what made the Wales household different. William and Catherine didn't just see their staff. They engaged with them. Morning briefings included asking about families, weekend plans, recent holidays. Catherine remembered birthdays. William joked with the guards during long car rides. The children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, taught to say please and thank you to everyone, regardless of rank. It wasn't performative. It was genuine. One afternoon, James was stationed outside the family's private sitting room while Catherine worked on correspondence. He heard young Louis inside, complaining about having to write thank you notes for birthday presents. "But, Mummy, it takes so long," the little boy whined. "I know, darling," Catherine replied patiently. "But when someone takes time to think of you and choose a gift, the least we can do is take time to thank them properly. It shows we value them, even the boring presents." Louis asked. Catherine laughed. "Especially the boring presents. Those require the most creativity in the thank you note." James smiled despite himself. This was the woman Camilla had dismissed as not understanding her place. The woman who was quietly teaching the future generation of royals that kindness wasn't optional, it was essential. But James's transfer hadn't gone unnoticed by everyone. About 6 weeks into his new position, he was working a late shift when Sarah Mitchell approached him in the corridor. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "My office. Now." James followed her, his mind racing through possible issues. Had he made a mistake? Overstepped somehow? Sarah closed the door behind them and sat down heavily. "I received a call today from Commander Peters. He wanted to know if you were settling in well."
"That's
"Nice of him, ma'am. It wasn't a social call, Whitmore. He was fishing, asking if there had been any issues, any concerns about your performance or attitude." James felt his jaw tighten. And I told him you were exemplary. Because you are." Sarah leaned forward. "But here's what you need to understand. Your transfer created waves. The Queen Consort's office is aware of it. They're aware that you refused her detail and immediately accepted one with the Wales family. I didn't mean to create a situation, I know. But situations get created whether we mean them to or not. There are people who see this as you making a statement. Taking sides in a family that's supposed to be united." James was quiet. Sarah continued. "I need to know if this is going to be a problem. If there are going to be events or situations where you'll be in the same space as the Queen Consort, I need to know you can handle it professionally." "Ma'am, absolutely. Because if you can't, I need to know now. Not when we're in the middle of a state dinner or a public engagement. I made a choice based on what I could live with, ma'am. But I'm a professional. If my duties require me to be in the presence of the Queen Consort, I'll perform them flawlessly. I won't create scenes or incidents. I'll do my job." Sarah studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Because that's exactly what's about to happen." She pulled out a schedule. 3 weeks from now, there's a family gathering at Windsor. The King's birthday celebration. All senior royals will be present, including both households. You're assigned to the Wales detail." James's stomach dropped slightly, but he kept his expression neutral. "Understood, ma'am. Camilla will be there. Her security team will be there. And everyone will be watching to see if there's any tension, any sign of discord. The press loves nothing more than royal family drama." "There won't be any issues from me, ma'am," Sarah smiled grimly. "Let's hope not. Because the truth is, Whitmore, you're better than most at this job. The princess was right to request you. But you're also now a symbol of something, whether you like it or not. And symbols get scrutinized." That night, James told Helen about the upcoming event. She listened quietly as he described the situation, the pressure, the scrutiny. Are you worried about seeing her? Helen asked. Camilla? No, I can be professional. That's not what I asked. I'm worried about what it represents. I made a private decision for private reasons. But now, it's becoming public. People are watching, drawing conclusions. Are their conclusions wrong? James looked at his wife. What do you mean? Well, did you or did you not refuse to serve Camilla because you disagreed with how she treated Catherine? Yes. And did you or did you not accept a position with Catherine because you respect her? Yes. Then their conclusions aren't wrong, James. They're just uncomfortable. Helen took his hand. You did what you thought was right. Now you have to stand by it. Not loudly, not dramatically, but firmly. The next 3 weeks passed quickly. James worked his rotations, learned the rhythms of the Wales household, and prepared mentally for the Windsor gathering. The day before the event, Catherine stopped him in the hallway. Sergeant Whitmore, a word? They stepped into a quiet alcove. Catherine's expression was gentle but serious. I'm aware that tomorrow might be uncomfortable for you, she said. I want you to know that if you'd prefer to swap shifts with another officer, I'll understand completely. James shook his head. Thank you, ma'am, but I'll be there. It's my job, Catherine smiled. I thought you'd say that. Just remember, you don't owe anyone explanations. You're there to do your job, nothing more. Yes, ma'am. She turned to leave, then paused. James, the Queen once told me something I've never forgotten. She said the crown requires sacrifice, but it should never require you to sacrifice your soul. You made a choice that honored that. Don't regret it. As Catherine walked away, James felt something shift inside him. He'd been viewing the upcoming event as a test, a challenge to get through. But maybe it was something else. Maybe it was a chance to prove that you could be loyal to the institution while still being true to your principles. The next morning, James put on his dress uniform, checked his equipment, and headed to Windsor Castle. He had no idea that the day would change everything. Windsor Castle looked magnificent in the late spring sunshine. Flags flew from the towers, and the grounds were immaculate. The king's birthday celebration was a private family affair, but it still required extensive security coordination. Multiple royal households, each with their own protection teams, all converging on one location. James arrived early to coordinate with the other officers. The security briefing was professional but tense. Everyone knew about the transfer. Everyone was watching. Commander Peters was there, overseeing the overall operation. He gave James a curt nod, nothing more. Davies, the officer who had replaced James on Camilla's detail, avoided eye contact entirely. The message was clear. James had made himself an outsider. The royal family began arriving around noon. The king and queen consort came first, their convoy sweeping through the gates with practiced precision. James watched from his position near the side entrance as Camilla stepped out of the car. Elegant in a pale blue dress and pearls, she smiled and waved to the staff lined up to greet her. For a moment, her eyes passed over James. There was no recognition, no reaction. Just a brief glance before she moved on. Had she noticed him? Did she even remember the guard who'd refused her detail? Probably not. To her, James was just another uniform. Another face in the background. An hour later, the Wales family arrived. James fell into position with their protection team as William, Catherine, and the children exited their vehicle. George and Charlotte were excited, chattering about seeing their grandfather. Little Louis held Catherine's hand, looking around with wide eyes. Good afternoon, Sergeant Whitmore, Catherine said warmly as she passed. Ma'am, James replied with a respectful nod. They'd been briefed to keep interactions minimal during the event. No unnecessary conversations. No displays that might suggest favoritism or division. The family gathering took place in the state apartments, a series of grand rooms usually reserved for official functions. James was stationed in the corridor outside, along with 3 other officers. Through the partially open doors, he could hear conversation, laughter. The clink of glasses, it sounded like any other family celebration. Warm. Normal. Then he heard Camilla's voice, clearer than the others. Charles, darling, we should discuss the arrangement for the summer garden party. I was thinking we might reduce the number of public attendees this year. Make it more refined, William's voice responded, diplomatic but firm. The garden parties are important for public engagement. The Queen always believed they helped people feel connected to the monarchy. The Queen also understood that times change, Camilla replied smoothly. We're not trying to be accessible to everyone. We're trying to be respected. There was a pause. Then Catherine spoke, her voice quieter but steady. With respect, I think being accessible and being respected aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, I'd argue they're connected. You would argue that, Camilla said, and there was that edge again? That subtle condescension. You've always had a very modern view of these things. The conversation shifted, moving to other topics, but James felt his hands clench. It was happening again. The implication that Catherine's approach was somehow naive or misguided? Beside him, another officer shifted uncomfortably. They'd heard it too. 2 hours into the celebration, James was relieved for a break. He headed to the staff area for water and found Sarah Mitchell already there, looking frustrated. Problem? James asked. It's nothing we can fix, she muttered. Just tension. You can feel it in there. The two households operating like separate camps. Is it always like this? Since the Queen died? Yes, before that, she kept everyone in line. Everyone behaved because she expected it. Now, Sarah shrugged. Now, there's no referee. James sipped his water. The prince seems to be handling it diplomatically. William is a master at keeping the peace, but he shouldn't have to. Not in his own family. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Sarah added, for what it's worth, I think you made the right call, refusing that assignment. James looked at her, surprised. I'm serious, Sarah continued. We're not supposed to have personal feelings about the people we protect. But we're human. And if you can't give someone your full dedication, it's better to step aside than to fake it. That kind of resentment shows eventually. Could even be dangerous in a critical moment. Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot. Don't thank me yet. You're still going to catch hell for it in some circles. But the right circles will understand. James returned to his post feeling slightly better. Maybe he wasn't as isolated as he'd thought. The celebration continued into the evening. Dinner was served in the grand reception room, with the family seated at a long table adorned with flowers and candles. James and the other protection officers maintained positions at discreet distances, close enough to respond to any threat, but far enough to provide the illusion of privacy. Midway through the meal, something unexpected happened. King Charles stood, raising his glass. I want to thank everyone for being here today. Family is the most important thing, and having all of you together means the world to me. He paused, and his expression grew more serious. I also want to acknowledge something. This past year has been difficult. We lost someone who was the center of this family for 7 decades. My mother was extraordinary, and her absence is still felt every day. There were murmurs of agreement around the table. But Charles continued she would want us to move forward, to honor her legacy by being united, by supporting each other, by putting duty and family above personal differences. His eyes moved around the table, lingering on William, then Catherine, then Camilla. We may not always agree on everything. We may have different styles, different approaches, but we are one family, one institution, and we must remember that. It was a plea as much as a statement, a reminder that they needed to set aside tensions for the sake of the monarchy. Camilla reached over and squeezed Charles's hand. William nodded respectfully. Catherine's expression was unreadable. The dinner continued, but the atmosphere had shifted slightly. The king had drawn a line. Family unity was expected. After dinner, as the family moved to the drawing room for coffee, James noticed Catherine step out onto a balcony overlooking the gardens. She stood alone, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warm evening. James hesitated, then approached Sarah. Should someone check on the princess? Sarah glanced at the balcony. I'll go. With respect, ma'am, she might prefer a familiar face. We've worked together for weeks now. Sarah considered this, then nodded. Keep it brief. And Whitmore? She's stronger than she looks. Don't treat her like she's fragile. James stepped onto the balcony quietly. Catherine didn't turn, but she spoke. "I'm all right, Sergeant. Just needed some air." "Of course, ma'am. I'll be just inside if you need anything." He started to retreat, but Catherine's voice stopped him. "Do you ever feel like you're trying to build something, but everyone around you is content with what already exists?" James paused. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I should." "It's not a formal question," Catherine said, finally turning to look at him. "I'm just thinking out loud." James moved to stand a respectful distance away. "I think anyone who tries to improve things faces resistance, ma'am. Change is uncomfortable, even when it's necessary." Catherine smiled sadly. The Queen understood that. She changed so much over her reign, but she did it gradually, carefully. "I think she knew that pushing too hard would break things. And you worry you're pushing too hard?" "I worry I'm not pushing hard enough. The world is changing, Sergeant. People's expectations of the monarchy are changing. We can't just be symbols anymore. We need to be real, accessible, human." She looked out at the gardens, but every time I try to do that, I'm reminded that not everyone wants the same thing. Some people prefer the distance, the mystique. They think that's what makes royalty special. James thought about Camilla's comment about accessibility versus respect, about Catherine not understanding her place. "For what it's worth, ma'am, I think the Queen would be proud of what you're trying to do." Catherine's eyes glistened slightly. "You think so?" "I know so. She told me once that the monarchy's survival depends on its ability to evolve. She knew the old ways couldn't last forever." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Catherine straightened, composing herself. "Thank you, Sergeant, for the conversation and for everything else." She walked back inside. James remained on the balcony for a moment longer. The king wanted unity. Camilla wanted tradition. Catherine wanted progress, and James, for better or worse, had chosen a side. The weeks following the Windsor gathering passed without incident. James settled deeper into his role with the Wales family, and gradually the scrutiny faded. People stopped whispering. The transfer became old news, but James knew the underlying tensions remained. The royal family might present a united front in public, but behind closed doors. The differences were clear. Then, in June, everything came to a head. James was working a routine shift at Kensington Palace when Sarah Mitchell called an emergency meeting. The entire protection team assembled in the security office, expressions tense. "We've just been informed," Sarah began, "that there will be a major reshuffling of royal protection assignments. The King's office wants better integration between households. More cross-assignment, more flexibility." James felt his stomach tighten. He knew what was coming. They're specifically requesting that senior officers rotate between the Wales detail and the Queen, consort's detail on a regular basis. The goal is to eliminate any perception of divided loyalty or separate camps. One of the younger officers spoke up. "That makes sense, ma'am. We should all be able to work with any member of the family." "In theory, yes," Sarah replied. "But in practice, it's more complicated." Her eyes found James. "Sergeant Whitmore, you're being specifically requested to participate in the rotation. 2 weeks with the Wales family, 2 weeks with the Queen consort, alternating." The room went silent. James kept his expression neutral. "When does this start, ma'am?" "Next month, assuming you accept." "And if I don't?" Sarah's voice softened. "Then you'll be transferred out of royal protection entirely. Those are the terms." It was an ultimatum. Serve Camilla or lose your career. James looked around the room. Some officers looked sympathetic. Others looked uncomfortable. Davies looked almost smug. "May I have time to consider?" James asked. 24 hours. Decision needed by tomorrow at 1700 hours. The meeting dispersed, but Sarah asked James to stay behind. "I fought this," she said once they were alone. "I argued that forcing officers into assignments they'd previously refused was bad policy. But I was overruled. This is coming from the very top. The king. Higher than that. This is about the institution. About maintaining the image of unity, whatever the personal cost." "I understand. Do you?" "Because I'm not sure I do. You made a principled decision, and now you're being punished for it. Or I'm being asked to reconsider it. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe personal feelings shouldn't matter. Sarah studied him carefully. You don't believe that? No, James admitted, but maybe what I believe doesn't matter. That evening, James sat with Helen in their small garden, watching the sunset. He'd told her everything. What do you want to do? Helen asked. I don't know. If I refuse, I lose everything. 23 years of service, my pension, my career. For what? Because I don't want to work with someone who was rude about Catherine? That's not why you refused the first time, Helen said gently. You refused because you couldn't give her your full dedication, your full loyalty. Has that changed? James was quiet. If you accept this rotation, Helen continued, you'll spend 2 weeks out of every month protecting someone you don't respect. Pretending you're as committed to her safety as you are to Catherine's. Can you honestly do that? I'm a professional. I can do my job regardless of personal feelings. It's not what I asked. James looked at his wife. What would you do? I'd ask myself what the Queen would have wanted. Not the institution. Not the crown. The actual woman you served for 2 decades. What would Elizabeth have told you to do? James closed his eyes, and suddenly he was back in a moment from 5 years ago. He'd been standing outside the Queen's private study when she'd called him in. It was unusual. She rarely spoke directly to her protection officers during work hours. Sergeant Whitmore, she'd said, looking up from her papers. I understand you were offered a promotion that would move you out of personal protection and into administrative work. Yes, ma'am. I declined it. May I ask why? James had hesitated. Because I believe my duty is here, ma'am. Protecting you, not behind a desk. The Queen had smiled, a rare, genuine expression. That's admirable. But I want you to understand something, James. Duty is important. Loyalty is important. But so is knowing when to walk away from something that compromises your integrity. Never let anyone, not even me, convince you to violate your own conscience for the sake of convenience. She'd returned to her papers then, and James had left, not fully understanding what she'd meant. Now he did. The next afternoon, James stood in Sarah Mitchell's office and gave his answer. I'm declining the rotation. I'm resigning from royal protection. Sarah's face fell. James, think about this. Your pension, your career, I have thought about it, and I can't do what they're asking. I won't pretend to be something I'm not. They'll see this as a statement, as taking sides, then let them. The Queen once told me never to violate my conscience for convenience. I'm honoring that. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she extended her hand. It's been an honor serving with you, Sergeant Whitmore. They shook hands, and James felt a weight lift from his shoulders. But there was one more thing he needed to do. That evening, he requested a brief meeting with Catherine. She received him in her private sitting room, concern evident on her face. Sergeant Whitmore, is everything all right? James stood at attention. Ma'am, I wanted to inform you personally that I'm resigning from royal protection. Catherine's expression shifted to shock. What? Why? He explained the rotation requirement, the ultimatum, his decision. Catherine listened, then stood and walked to the window. When she turned back, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. This is my fault. If I hadn't requested you for our detail, no, ma'am. This is my choice. Mine alone. But you're losing your career because you refused to serve Camilla. Because you stood up for me. James, that's not fair. With respect, ma'am, fairness isn't the point. Integrity is... The Queen taught me that. Catherine wiped her eyes quickly. What will you do? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. Well, she crossed the room and did something unexpected. She hugged him. Brief, but genuine. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. For being one of the few people in this world who sees past the titles to the person underneath. 2 weeks later, James Whitmore walked out of Kensington Palace for the last time as a royal protection officer. His uniform was packed away. His badge returned. His career ended. But as he drove home through the London streets, he didn't feel defeated. He felt free. His phone buzzed. A text from Helen, proud of you. Then another, from a number he didn't recognize. The Queen would be proud too. Thank you for your service. C. Catherine, the future Queen Consort. Taking time to acknowledge a guard who'd sacrificed his career rather than compromise his values. 6 months later, James was working as a private security consultant when he received an unexpected letter. It was from William's office. Inside was a brief note: "When the time comes, we have the authority to make our own choices without interference. There will be a place for you with us, if you want it." W. James folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. The crown required sacrifice. The institution demanded loyalty. But people, real people with real integrity, were worth fighting for. James had made his choice. He'd refused to serve someone who belittled the very qualities the monarchy should represent. He'd walked away from security and prestige to honor his conscience. And somewhere, he hoped, Queen Elizabeth was smiling. Because in the end, she'd been right. Some things were worth more than convenience. Some principles couldn't be compromised, not even for a crown. The story of why Queen Elizabeth's favorite guard refused to serve Camilla after Catherine was insulted wasn't just about one man's choice. It was about what the monarchy could be, should be, what it would become when people like Catherine and William finally had the power to shape it. And James Whitmore, retired guard, would be watching, waiting for that day to come.